This is Hannibal here from The Hannibal TV on YouTube. We're also on Facebook and Twitter. And today I have a returning guest who I usually have on to talk about UFOs and Bigfoot. But I've been watching some new sea monster videos lately, and I was aware that Preston Dennett, paranormal author, has a lot of knowledge about these alleged sea monsters. So I thought I'd ask if he'd be nice enough to come on and talk to us about it. So, how are you doing today, Preston?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, not bad. Hope you are too.
Yeah, I'm still in Kansas here, and the weather is nice and sunny today. So I'm happy about that because it's snowing where I'm from in Canada.
Yeah, we're getting close to spring. I can't wait because it's been cold here where I'm at. We had about a foot of snow a month or two back, which, I've got a steep driveway that pretty much snowed us in for a week.
How far are you from Atlanta?
2 hours or so.
Okay, so you're way out there.
Yeah, I'm up in the mountains, but I love it. Lots of trees. Bigfoot Museum, by the way, just 15, 20 minutes away.
So you're
So
in Bigfoot country.
100%. Still waiting to see one, but lots of reports around this area.
You're in not only Bigfoot country, but an area that you could probably see a UFO fairly clearly if you have a clear sky at night.
Georgia has a lot of encounters. Not quite as much as Florida, which is definitely one in the top 10 there, but I've interviewed quite a few people from Georgia who are contactees. So
Wow.
definitely I know there's stuff going on here.
What about sea monsters in Georgia?
Don't know of any. I mean, I
Yeah.
know I know there are, gosh, Lake Lanier has got some interesting things going on with ghosts and stuff. Uh, but I'm not sure it has any sea monsters in there. But Georgia does have a lot of lakes, so it wouldn't surprise me. I know Wisconsin is the land of lakes, and reportedly there are a number of sea monsters up there. Wherever there's a large lake, you get reports of unknown creatures.
Yeah, they're more common than people would think. And let's start this off. What are like the different kinds? Because there seems to be the more plesiosaur looking ones, then there's the more snake looking ones that some people believe might be very large sturgeons.
Yeah, I've heard the sturgeon explanation, and I don't buy it. I don't think people are seeing sturgeons, which can get quite large, and I think might fool someone who's, perhaps never seen one or heard of a sturgeon. But the reports that are coming from people are clearly not sturgeons. Yeah, depending, two or three main types. When it comes to lake monsters, yeah, you would be looking at large snake-like creatures, which are not your typical, serpent, because some of these describe heads that are very much more like a horse, perhaps. Very unusual. Uh, but uh, other types as well. I mean, when it comes to the ocean, actually, there's of course the kraken type creatures, enormous giant squids. We've got some skeletal remains of giant turtles that are, as big as a house, just about. No kidding. So there are all kinds of creatures out there. But yeah, the snake-like ones, the plesiosaur as well. I think probably that might be what's hanging out in Loch Ness. There's been a few interesting photographs that were taken by researchers, which point towards possibly it being a plesiosaur. But until it's verified, we don't know. Definitely something hanging out in a number of very popular lakes. Lake Champlain, for example, is a very well-known lake for having a sea monster, and they recorded something doing echolocation, which freshwater fish don't do, or as far as we know. So that very clearly is good evidence. Not to mention the some hundreds of eyewitnesses reports of Champ of Lake Champlain. All these lakes have the nickname for their little creature that, or shouldn't say little, big, that lives there.
Has there been more video come out since the advent of cell phones, or has sightings still pretty much remained the same? Because I have been looking, and there does seem to be some new stuff that seems fairly credible as far as unknown objects that are large and you can't figure them out on tape. But there doesn't seem to necessarily be as many as you would think would be out.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know that I've seen a huge increase in photographic cases. They do turn up fairly regularly. Almost always, they're just that much ambiguous where you can't quite say for sure, this is absolutely an unidentified creature of some kind. But I mean, there are literally hundreds of videotapes, and a few are quite impressive. I mean, there was one that was real close up in a lake in Canada. I don't think it was Okanagan Lake, Okopogo, which is very well-known area for having a sea monster. But it was on several of these reality TV shows, and it showed a very large snake-like creature covered with ice, actually. And even though it was close up, there was still that element of, not sure what this is. And there's so many instances, of course, of skeletons and remains of unusual creatures washing up on shore, which some are quite impressive. It's really interesting because the giant squid, which was only recently, I'm going to say recent, like the past 20 years, has never been captured on film. But they finally did it in the Sea of Cortez off of California, or, towards Mexico, and proved that the giant squid does in fact exist. So that was something that was considered a cryptozoological creature for a long time. And now we know, that it is real. And, we have proof that the giant squid do exist, which of course, with so many reports from sailors going out through the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s reporting this, some big enough apparently to actually pull down large sailing ships. So there's something to these reports.
Would the thing that you were thinking of in Canada possibly be this one from actually Alaska that appears to be in ice
Yeah,
here?
yeah, that's the one. Yeah, looks interesting. There have been some accusations that this was a hoax and it's being towed along, but it looks like a living creature, doesn't it? I mean, it's unusual. This is the snake-like beings that so many people report seeing. Uh, so
Yeah, the Ogopogo one is supposed to be snake-like, I hear.
yeah,
And the
which is interesting because Lake Okanagan, I've got a bunch of USO reports, UFOs essentially, in that same area. Not saying there's a connection there, but it's interesting to have two of these phenomena, because sometimes Bigfoot and UFO reports coincide exactly. And with Lake Okanagan, there's a number of USO reports there, as well as, this unusual sea monster, Ogopogo.
Yeah, and it's right in the middle of Kelowna too, so it's in a populated area, but at the same time, Kelowna is fairly secluded. Like there's not much. It's not like there's another major city that close to it. So, although the town itself has people in it, it's not that populated. But I was not aware of the UFO activity. I wasn't aware there's a lot of California lake monsters, which of course you've been in California for a while, although you're in Georgia now. What can you tell us about these California ones? And is there any good footage of any California lake monsters I could look up?
I'm not sure about good footage, but definitely a lot of reports. I started looking into lake monsters and sea monsters in California when I was given a contract for a book called Supernatural California, where I basically explored all the mysteries that California has to offer, from UFO hotspots and haunted locations and so forth. And that, of course, included a whole section on cryptozoology. And I was frankly surprised to see how many locations there are out there in California alone which have some really impressive reports. There's a number of lakes with alleged lake monsters, and one of them is a lake I've been to actually many times. I've gone kayaking on it. It's not a super large lake, but the reports there go way, way back. This is Lake Elizabeth. The monster of Lake Elizabeth, as you might suspect, is called Lizzie. This is about 17 miles west of Palmdale on Elizabeth Lake Road. And reports go all the way back. And these are pretty credible because there are numerous reports. The earliest I could find was in 1780. A Spanish explorer by the name of Junipero Serra. He actually named the lake La Laguna de Diablo because Native Americans said that there was a dragon-like creature who lived in there. So the Native Americans in that area have oral reports going back quite some years. But the first sort of Westerner to report it was a rancher by the name of Don Pedro Carrillo, who actually abandoned his ranch, he says, in 1830 because his property was burned down mysteriously, allegedly by this sea monster. It was settled by American settlers in 1855, but also abandoned because they felt it was haunted. So there were some weird reports, but the first real sighting of the actual creature was by a rancher, Don Chico Lopez, who said that he saw this thing with his own eyes. He described it as a, quote, huge monster with bat-like wings. So he said came right out of the lake. And he suspected something was going on there because something was stealing his livestock. His livestock were being eaten, and he couldn't figure out what was doing it until he saw, he says, this dragon-like creature. If you look into the history of dragons, it's pretty impressive. There are some really interesting first-hand reports of dragons in numerous cultures on our planet. So I think that is a possible case of one of the last surviving dragons.
Is that it? Is that like what did they find here? Because this is supposedly the Lake Elizabeth, a version of the Lake Elizabeth monster, right?
Could be. I mean, that's what they said it looked like. I've looked into a lot of the photography, and some of it is trickery. I mean, there's a very famous case where people are holding up what looks like a pterosaur, and it turns out if you look, you can find the original photo. It's not a pterosaur at all. I have not seen this photo, so that's interesting. But yeah, what I like about the Lake Elizabeth case is there's a number of reports. In 1886, another rancher purchased the same property, Miguel Leones, and he also said he saw the creature, as did another rancher, Don Felipe Rivera. Now, Lake Elizabeth is not that deep, and here's one of the issues with reports on this. It has dried up completely during droughts. Now, there are some investigators who feel like maybe these reports were actually coming from Lake Hughes, which is very nearby. It's a much larger lake. It's 5 miles away. But following the late 1800s, there were no further reports. So either that creature died or it moved off. Hard to say for sure. But with multiple reports like that, I think it's definitely a possibility that there was at some point a dragon-like creature living in Lake Elizabeth. Interestingly, there are a few lakes there that they don't know the depth of them. One is called Bottomless Lake because apparently it's never been measured to just how far down it goes. So some of these lakes could very possibly be connected by underwater tunnels, so to speak, because there's a number of lakes in this area.
Yeah, and looking at some of the pictures of it, it definitely looks to be like a dragon-like creature that maybe could have flown and also gone in the water. But it doesn't appear that there's a lot of pictures, and I guess that has to do with the times that it was being seen the most. before a lot of people had cameras. But I see here's a drawing of it that I'll put up on the screen to give people an idea of what they think it might look like. It's what somebody.
Yeah, I mean, it would be amazing to see one of these things. And
Yeah.
the fact that, there are so many reports of these throughout history definitely, I think, argues towards the authenticity of some of these reports, because the descriptions are very consistent. And if people were making this up, it would be hard to describe them in such similar detail.
Have you ever heard about the muskrat lake monster in Canada? It's one of the lesser known ones.
No, I haven't.
Yeah.
Have not heard of that one, but yeah, I looked into the California lakes, and there's 4 or 5 of them that are pretty well verified. One that they did solve, actually, it was Lake Laguna, which is up in the Clear Lakes area of Northern California. Pretty large lake. A lot of people reported seeing something. And in 2000, reports were stretching back 40 years or so. But on September 9, 2004, they found out what this was. Workers had been hired to pull fish from the lake, and they caught something unusual in their nets. Because at this point, the lake was undergoing a $2 million renovation. So they were basically dredging the entire lake. And they found what, Old Bob, it's called, Old Bob of Lake Laguna. And it turned out to be a turtle. This was a very large turtle. It's actually not native to this area, so it must have been dumped in the lake. It was a giant alligator snapping turtle, 100 pounds, an estimated 50 years old. They caught him, pulled him out and put him into a museum or a habitat. But yeah, there was a lot of reports of this, and people were trying to figure out what it was. Turns out it was just an alligator snapping turtle. But really, when it comes to California, there's 3 lakes that are really well known, and one is definitely Lake Elsinore. Elsie of Lake Elsinore is the monster in this case, and this one goes back quite some time. Lake Elizabeth also has dried up a couple of times in its history, so perhaps this monster lays eggs and they birth when they, gets wet again. But there's no doubt people have been seeing something that we have not identified in Lake Elizabeth, because accounts stretch back, almost 140 years now. It's to 1884, I believe, is the earliest report. And it was a Mr. Greenstreet who he and his family described seeing a creature about 100 feet long, not a sturgeon, with a 30-foot tail. And it moved so quickly across the lake, it actually created a break, a wave of 10 feet high. It scared them so bad they refused to go back in the lake ever again. And following that, almost no reports until about the 1960s. And then it was reported fairly regularly. There was a family boating in 1967 who said that they saw the classical, humps coming out of the water like we see in so many descriptions. And there, you put a statue on the thumbnail of this video, which shows the lake, Elsie of Lake Elsinore. That's pretty much what they were describing. And some people got a much better look. One guy said that he saw this creature twice. He said it was at least 12 feet long, what he could see of it. And he said he did see its head, and it looked like a dinosaur, is how he described it. So yeah, a lot of reports throughout the 60s and 70s mostly. There was one guy who visited Lake Elsinore. He's originally from Henderson, Nevada. And he and his wife were going water skiing. He's towing his wife and saw this creature, which following his wife while she's water skiing behind him. And yeah, most of them say that it's very much got the humps coming out of the water. A few described little spines coming out on the humps. But yeah, some really interesting firsthand eyewitness cases coming from Lake Elsinore, quite a few of them.
Yeah, and we've heard in that famous In Search of Ogopogo, that old film, there's cases of that monster following some water skiers and stuff as well back in the
Yeah.
70s.
Well, here's a really interesting case from Sam Daniels. I got a quote from this guy because he saw it and he saw what he described as a very large lizard-like creature. And he says it was swimming back and forth about 20 feet away from him and had huge round black eyes, dark green skin with black spots on it. And as he saw it dive into the water, and it had a carp in its mouth, and he noticed that it had rows of small, sharp dagger-like teeth. He didn't tell anybody about it for years until he heard that there were other reports in this lake.
There's a fan on here that talks about the famous Lake Erie monster that I think Lake Erie's part of Canada and the US. I've heard of this one.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. The Great Lakes, they're very large lakes. Lake Erie is the shallowest of the lakes, uh, but it doesn't surprise me a bit. uh, because every time you look into any particular area, you will find reports of various lake monsters.
There's a clip of what someone's definitely something unusual in Lake Erie there. I don't know if it's the monster or not, but a large black object in the water. Have you ever heard of any of these things actually causing harm to humans?
I have not, no. Um, Not that I'm aware of, other than, throughout history, sea serpents, yes, pulling down ships and this sort of thing. But lake monsters, not the ones in California, I should say, which is really my area of expertise. But the more I look into this, there are a lot of reports. So I couldn't tell you with any real authority on whether that has happened or not. It wouldn't surprise me. But as far as the California area, no, I don't know of anyone who's been harmed by one of these lake monsters.
Was there ever any mass sightings of any of these California ones?
Um, well, I would have to take a little bit of a deeper dive. Think there for a second. I know there was another lake, and I wonder about this one because most of the reports are basically coming from one source, and it's Lake Hodges in Southern California, which is a large lake. And I'm really not sure what to make of this because I couldn't find confirmation from a lot of different sources. There's some newspaper articles, but there's this one website which basically focuses on Haji of Lake Hodges, which is a fairly large lake, 27 miles of shoreline. It's long, thin, and winding. It's about 115 feet deep. But it's an old lake. It's been there for, they estimate, 40,000 years. Used to be a smaller lake until they dammed it up, but was regarded by the local Native Americans, the Kumeyaay Native Americans, as sacred, because I guess they believed that there was some sort of creature in there. But yeah, they reportedly photographed Haji of Lake Hodges. I remember seeing a photograph of this being when they tried to basically capture it. And apparently they caught it briefly in a cage, but it broke free. I don't know what, again, to make of this particular case, because there are some who've tried to debunk it. But it's definitely another example of lake monsters in California. Really, it's Lake Tahoe that is famous, which of course shares a border with Nevada. But Lake Tahoe is a very large freshwater lake. It's an enormous tourist attraction, but it's got an estimated depth of some 1,600 feet. So that's pretty deep. I mean, that's almost a third mile or so. So this is a very large lake, a length of 22 miles. Been there a number of times. And sightings go way, way back there as well. The local Native Americans, the Washoe and Paiute tribes have numerous reports of a large sea monster of some kind. It's believed to live in one area called Cave Rock, where there have been a number of sightings. Modern sightings, in terms of Westerners, go back to about 1897, and from that point on, I mean, there was a period of time where there would be multiple sightings per year at Lake Tahoe. Skeptics tried to call it a sturgeon, but according to the reports from the first-hand witnesses, definitely not a sturgeon.
Have you ever actually seen anything like that? Or were you even interested in it before you had to write the book on the California paranormal?
I kind of drifted into cryptozoology not long after I started investigating UFO reports. I resisted it at first because I was pretty much had my plate full with UFOs, but then got a report of Bigfoot in a UFO case and really just kind of followed the evidence and began to investigate it sort of in a more hobbyist way until I got contracted to write this book. And that's when I really started studying it and was amazed to see how well verified some of these locations are. Definitely, there's something in Lake Tahoe. There's well over 100 reports. People describe this, it's a snake-like, a serpent-like creature. Some say it's well over 20 feet long. So this can't be a sturgeon, not based on what people are seeing. But reportedly, and this is kind of interesting, Jacques Cousteau did an expedition there and clammed up after he, according to rumors, this has never been confirmed, he never talked about it, but rumors started coming out that he did find Tessie of Lake Tahoe and said that the public was not ready to hear about this. And I think perhaps if he did see it, he decided to keep it secret in order to protect this being, which, in a lake is a very, limited habitat. So it doesn't have a lot of chances to, evade people if people should start looking for it. But yeah, quite a number of reports of Lake Tahoe.
How many lakes in California do you think have monsters in them?
4 or 5 for sure. The ones I mentioned, those are basically the main ones. But yeah, I mean, some of the reports in Lake Tahoe, they describe this snake-like creature being upwards of 60 feet long. So that's amazing. I mean, they actually put up a museum and collected reports. There's books on just, Tessie alone. So I am very, very much convinced that there's something in Lake Tahoe that has yet to be officially identified. But to me, even more interesting than all the lakes were the reports of coming off the California coast of very, very large sea serpent. These reports go way back. They go all the way from the top of California, and presumably Oregon and Washington, all the way down to Mexico. California's got a very long coastline. And reports of these sea serpents are definitely been seen by multiple witnesses over and over and over again. One of the earliest sightings occurred on December 21st, 1879, when Captain Verschure of the ship Granada was sailing off of Cape San Lucas. This is in Southern California, when he and his entire crew said that they saw a serpent-like creature lift its head out of the water, about 3 feet out of the water. Everyone saw it, and it was either a very large eel or a baby sea serpent. one of the officers, the ship's second officer, said that he had seen sea serpents before, but that was the earliest one, and that's way back in 1879. And following that, just regular reports year after year. There was a really interesting sighting in 1885 when steamboat passengers were off the San Francisco coast and saw what they described as, quote, a huge black monster. And it rose up out of the water. They said its mouth was about 4 feet wide, filled with sharp teeth, and had a tail that extended at least 60 feet. So, yeah, I mean, many, many, many reports.
And I guess you would expect there would be a lot of these in the ocean, and because we haven't explored so much of the ocean, there's a lot of these things around there that we probably don't even know about.
Yeah, the ocean is, this planet, as we all know, is over 70% water. And these oceans that are very, very deep. The Monterey Trench, for example, off of Monterey, California, is a marine reserve. It contains an enormous number of different species of fish. It's very, very deep. This trench actually goes all the way down towards Southern California. So if there would be a place for a large creature like this to hide, that would be the place. And I mean, here's a really interesting report in 1919. What I like about this report is it comes from a very famous fisherman by the name of Ralph Bandini. He's an expert game fisherman. He's authored a number of classic books on fishing. He was the secretary of the Tuna Club, a member of the California Fish and Game Commission, a really good witness. And he had a sighting of what came to be known as the San Clemente monster. This is off the coast of Santa Catalina Island, the San Clemente Island, this whole cluster of islands off the Southern California coast, which, by the way, is a huge UFO, USO hotspot. But they saw this creature coming up out of the water and just rising higher and higher and higher. And before they could get close to it, it dove back down. But 1 year later, he was out there with his fishing partner, Smith Warren, 8 o'clock in the morning, right off the coast of San Clemente Island, when they saw this very large creature come up out of the water with a giraffe-like head, a very, very long neck, which they said must have been 5 or 6 feet thick, lifting up about 10 feet into the air. And this is so interesting. They said going down the back of its neck was a mane of coarse, thick hair, which kind of looked like fine seaweed, dank. But the eyes, they said, were huge, big as dinner plates, bulging, round, at least a foot in diameter. And they looked at this through binoculars, so they got a good, clear look at it. And as they watched, it just slowly went down beneath the surface without making even so much as a splash. And they viewed this from about a quarter mile away. So a pretty well verified sighting. He said he believes it was larger than a blue whale, which is, of course, the largest known creature living on our planet.
There's a lot of these oarfish in California, some of them like 20 or 30 feet long. Do you think some of these could be misidentified oarfish, which are pretty damn huge? I wouldn't want to encounter one of these things if I'm out swimming.
Yeah, I mean, maybe some of the sea serpent ones where they're little, going along the surface, but no, not the ones where these humps are coming out and its head comes up and it's 10 feet in the air. For example, in that sighting I just described, Bandini said he knew that this creature was very large because there were swells in the water, and this creature was not rising up with the swells. So it was large enough that it was staying steady in the ocean, which, absolutely could not be faked. This is not someone pulling a prank or anything like this. No way could that be an oarfish. I looked into the whole idea of oarfish, which can get quite long. but they're pretty small in diameter. They're not no more than a foot or two. So people were describing, a 5 foot wide neck. No way that's an oarfish.
Is there any sea monster that you think is the most credible around the world?
There are, so many reports. To me, it's the huge number of reports that argues for the credibility. Because if you look into I'm a huge fan of shipwrecks and old sea stories, and these stories come up regularly. And I think that you have to take a look at the actual number of reports. If it were just one or two, you could say, well, it's a sea tale, someone making something up just to pass the night. But no, there's quite literally hundreds of these reports. And why this has not been caught on footage up to this point, I'm kind of surprised. Perhaps, I'm purely speculating here that these beings are, quite aware. I'm not going to say they're sentient, but I certainly wonder about it. But we know animals, their senses are very sharp. And we all know about how well sharks can smell just a drop of blood in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So it's a possibility that these beings, these sea monsters, as we call them, are hyper aware of when ships are in the area and know to keep hidden. Central to Northern California, a fisherman by the name of Sal Collette said that he saw something floating on the surface, so he approached it, and he said it was a giant creature with a huge barrel-like head. He saw it some years later in 1938 and got a closer look at it, and he said it had an almost human-looking face. That I found really interesting. He says he came upon it and it was just sleeping on the surface of the water on its back, and as soon as he approached to it, it quickly dived back into the water.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
Now
Monterey
we
Bay.
hear it. Where is it? Normandy Bay?
Monterey Bay, in that area, is where a lot of these reports are coming. There was one in 1925 from a Mr. E.J. Lear. He was driving along the coast when he saw commotion in the water, and he said that a group of sea lions were attacking what looked like a 30-foot long snake-like creature. So yeah, the huge number of reports, I think, is what argues best for the existence of these creatures.
And as far as there's a connection between Bigfoot and aliens, do you think that, like you mentioned, that UFOs are seen over Okanagan? Is that about the extent of it, or is it common to have UFOs over Lake Monster Lakes? As I'll show some new Loch Ness monster footage while we're at it, while you're explaining that.
Yeah, no, I wasn't able to draw any direct correlations between UFOs and sea monsters. Certainly not to the extent that you can absolutely with Bigfoot. And if you do your research, you can find UFO sightings pretty much anywhere on this planet. It's much more common, I think, than most people realize. And that's the problem. When people have an experience that is outside of their worldview or not accepted by mainstream science, they're not likely to report it. They may tell family or friends. They may even call the police, but it rarely goes farther than that. And who do you report a sea monster to? There's really not any organizations that specialize in that, not to the extent of UFOs and Bigfoot. So I would suspect the vast majority of cases like these go completely undocumented, unreported, uninvestigated.
As far as UFOs, just quickly, it seems like the UFO news has been fairly dead compared to what it was last time I talked to you. We've heard about Anna Paulina Luna's task force, which seems to be having issues with other subjects, and it hasn't even really delved into UAPs yet. Um, Have you heard anything new that's going on?
Well, I mean, we're seeing steps towards, what I'll put that in quotes, disclosure. I think we're getting a lot of push towards it from lots of discussion, lots of talk. I'm waiting for real action. We have a new administration who's supposedly trying to be more transparent with a number of issues, like the Kennedy and Martin Luther King assassinations, and UAPs, as they call them. I'm not a fan of that term. I'll just call them UFOs. I think that works just fine. So I'd love to see some real action instead of just talk, because we've had congressional hearing after congressional hearing, and we're not really getting any major results with it. I still want them to just basically show us the Roswell craft. Until our governments, the intelligence agencies in particular, are willing to admit to the fact that Roswell occurred, or the Malmstrom incident in 1967, the Capitol flyover in 1952, the Edwards Air Force Base meeting with Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, and ETs. That's pretty well verified if you look into it. I want to get some confirmation on those. If they're not willing to come clean on a list of 20 or 30 very well documented UFO incidents throughout our history, I don't see why we should take them seriously at all. They've lied from the beginning. So I don't know if we even should look to them for answers. And by that I mean, our intelligence agencies, the highest levels of the military. I want disclosure. I think we should have truth and transparency with this subject. But anyone who does their investigation into it can come away absolutely convinced without the help of our own government. So it's a little too late at this point. They really need to do some heavy duty disclosure if they want to remain credible and remain in control of the narrative. So it would be to their benefit to disclose. Ultimately, that's my opinion.
Yeah, that would be good. Whether it'll happen, I guess time will tell. This is a really good piece of footage that someone who wasn't even intending to catch it.
Yeah, I have seen this one.
Yeah, that thing is huge, and it's moving at a pretty good rate as well.
Yeah, it does not look like AI. Hard to tell for sure these days, but this was taken quite a bit earlier before AI became widely available. And absolutely does have the ring of authenticity with multiple people watching it. I've seen this footage several times. It's interesting for sure.
What's going on with To the Stars Academy these days? It doesn't seem like they're putting out as much as they used to. Tom DeLonge's group with Jim Semivan.
Yeah, I haven't heard much from that camp recently. I'm concerned because we're seeing a lot of whistleblowers, and some of the testimony that's coming from them, I really question, particularly this talk about psionics and using technology that is, quote, psychically based to fool ETs into coming down, and then we shoot them down. I don't find that the least bit credible. ETs are incredibly advanced. They know, they're telepathic. You're not going to be able to fool them. So I don't find those reports remotely credible. And I'm concerned that, the disinformation is ramping up. And I think what we're seeing is, steps towards a possible false flag ET invasion. There's been a lot of buzz about that for a very long time. This recent drone wave really has me concerned because I don't think that's ET. I've talked to a number of people who are kind of in the know. I would point to James Goodall, who's an aviation historian, very familiar with secret aircraft of all kinds. He's really the go-to guy. He believes that these drones are as well covert military ops. Talked to a few other people within the military. So I'm concerned about it. I don't think that our government can shoot down these craft because they will know before you even press any button. what is going on. They're very, very advanced.
What did you think about Jeremy Corbell's claim on his Tubi documentary that supposedly there's going to be some false flag operation, that some mothership is on the way here in the next few years, and that's what all this talk about the imminent UFO event coming is all about?
Yeah, I'm tempted to just say no comment, just to be polite. I'm skeptical. Uh, whenever these government folks open their mouths, I just don't trust them. I'm not saying Corbell is, linked to that, mind you, but predictions about what's going to happen in our future and giant motherships with ETs, uh, mm, we'll wait and see. I think the truth will be revealed with time, but I don't think for 1 second that ETs are going to come here and take over or start shooting at people. And if something like that does happen, if a giant mothership appears in the sky and it starts sending down beams of light and causing all kinds of havoc and explosions, that is, in my opinion, a false flag operation. And we've seen a number of really suspicious reports coming from various areas that could be what I would call practice runs for this. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what the future brings. This field is filled with all kinds of predictions. The vast majority of them never pan out. So I'm very skeptical when anyone, starts predicting the future of what's going to happen in this area.
And have you heard about this new Age of Disclosure movie? I'm just throwing up the trailer here. There's 34 whistleblowers supposedly in it. It's being released tonight, including Jim Semivan there, but some huge names in it. Hal Puthoff,
Yep.
Lou Elizondo's in it too, I believe. You know all of these guys. What can we expect from this? And have you seen the screening of it? There's Tim Gallaudet.
Yeah. No, I have not seen the screening. Um, I'm interested. I'm interested to see what these guys reveal, because I do think that there are legit whistleblowers out there who really just want the truth to be told. But I think there's different types of whistleblowers. There are ones who are straight up, dead up government agents pushing a false narrative, steering this subject in the way they want it steered. And I'm distrustworthy of them. And I can't name names, I don't know, but I suspect a number of them are not what we would call a legit whistleblower, while others are absolutely legitimate whistleblowers, but are being played, uh, being fed false information, being steered in a certain direction, are completely innocent, totally honest, but are being manipulated. And then there's another type of whistleblower who is flat out saw stuff, want it to get known, and are doing the right thing. But I'm of the mind that if someone is a whistleblower and they have information that our governments, our secret governments, will find damaging or make them culpable of a cover-up, they're not likely to be able to go forward without extreme repercussions. We know people have lost their lives over this subject. A lot of suspicious deaths among whistleblowers and, frankly, some UFO researchers as well. So I don't know if how much of this is sanctioned or not. I'm very interested to see, because I do think disclosure is inevitable. It is the truth. UFOs have visited our planet. ETs are real. You can't hide the truth forever. It's going to come out. So I think to an extent, disclosure is inevitable. But you can just see the propaganda dripping from a lot of these reports and the tight leash on some of these witnesses who you try to question. Well, you hear them being questioned, and they say, I can't talk about that. NDAs here, NDAs there. I can tell you this in a private skiff, and so forth. But I would love it if, perhaps one of these governments just spilled the beans. If we could get a sitting head of state, maybe our president or some other, to just say UFOs are real, that would be a stride forward. We haven't had that. So it looks like we're just going to get baby steps for a very long time. And I'm a little jaded. I don't think our governments will ever be fully truthful and transparent with this subject, ever. Not voluntarily. Someone may force them into it. Someone may spill the beans to such an extent that the dominoes start falling from country to country to country. But until, to me, the end game is, seeing the craft in a museum with public access, seeing the bodies, opening all of this up to the mainstream scientific community. Until we have that, to me, disclosure has not happened, not from the government.
And just back to sea monsters for a bit. About 10 or so years ago, this video came out of this Florida sea monster. The full version has been taken down, and we'll see it appear. Do you know which one I'm talking about here?
Not sure. I would recognize it if and when it comes out of
Yeah,
the water here.
it's going to come out.
There
Okay,
we
there it
go.
started to come out, but it does come out a good amount. And I always wondered why more was not made out of this, because I remember when this video first came out, it got a lot of publicity, and then now there was a version of it that showed a lot more, and now that version seems to be down.
Yeah, look at that. That's exactly what so many people have reported seeing, these sort of slithering humps. It looks like a very large anaconda type snake like creature, which makes perfect sense because the oceans are so vast. I mean, if I remember flying to Hawaii, it took 5 hours. We were all 2.5 hours out and hadn't seen any land. And finally, we're coming down to Hawaii. It's a tiny little dot in the middle of the ocean. I would be surprised if there was stuff there that we, have not figured out.
Yeah, I was there a few months ago too. You can sure see the skies very clearly at night there too. Um, I can see why there's a lot of sightings in Hawaii, which I'm sure you're aware of. But yeah, this is one of the best overall. I mean, and they took some of it out, but this is one of the best sea monster footage that I've seen. And Florida's not really even known for it.
Yeah, we should really have live action cameras fully monitoring all these locations because I'm sure we would catch stuff certainly off the Santa Catalina area and the Monterey Trench area because there are a bunch of reports. I mean, there was one in 1938 when the crew of a ship, the Dante Alighieri, was crossing over the deepest part of the Monterey Trench, and they saw a serpent-like creature at least 30 feet long that they could see, which again they described as having a human-like face. Others describe it as being very much like a giraffe. Another person said that it looked almost like a monkey's face with eyes, very much like the size of a dinner plate, barnacles all over the body, big folds of skin hanging off of its neck. They estimated that creature must have weighed 8 or 9 tons. So quite a number of beings in the Monterey, number of reports in the Monterey Trench area.
So people are saying maybe again it could be a manatee's foot or a manatee that's been run over. Maybe it was investigated and just there's no formal investigation that's been released. But yeah, I remember when that came out, it was unusual. But there's something weird. There's a little something weird about that one. It's a very large manatee, anyways. But
Yeah, well, people have, there are reports of, oh gosh, half fish, half humans, mermaids and mermen, which, are a huge number of reports. And I frankly, just from a scientific perspective, cannot swallow any of those reports of, there being a half human, half fish. And yet, if you look into the literature, there's a number of reports on that. And that does make me question some of these eyewitnesses. But when you have multiple witnesses on a ship describing something, and in terms of the creatures being seen off the California coast, there's so many reports of these people describing one of these sea serpents is having a face like a monkey or a gorilla or almost human-like, but I think there's something to it. That would be something to see if someone could actually capture that on camera, because that is absolutely unknown to mainstream science.
For UFOs, I was going to ask you. Recently, I've been learning that they're seen a lot around gold mines all over the world, and especially in remote places. But they're not taking gold or anything. What do you think? Because there's mass sightings of them by gold mine workers all the time, which we just don't hear about because they're a lot of the times in foreign places, but they've been documented. What do you think it is about gold that attracts the UAPs?
Um, well, I actually did a whole study on UFO encounters over and around mines, and I found over 100. This is absolutely a thing. They're very much interested in mines for whatever reason. Couldn't find any evidence that they're actually taking the metal. I think probably they're more along the lines of studying what we're doing with it, because there are cases of UFOs scooping up the mine tailings, what we've already mined. But reports over gold mines, silver mines, iron mines, uranium mines, diamond mines, copper mines. Arizona, for example, is the United States' leading producer of copper. There's a ton of reports of UFOs over Arizona's copper mines, which are largely in one main area. And amazing, because these are not just sightings of craft over the area, but they're landing. There are humanoids being seen. And on occasion, these mines are being disturbed to some extent. So I think there's something to it. Couldn't find evidence that they're taking our metals. But there is one really interesting case in Karnes City, Texas, at a uranium mine, where they had charted this whole vein of uranium. And this is an open pit mine, not way deep underground. It's exposed to the surface. They had a very large craft show up, send down multiple beams of light. It upset some of the miners to the point that they wept. I mean, they were very frightened by what they were seeing, and got a lot of ribbing from the people who hadn't seen it, and who basically ridiculed them until they dug down to this vein of uranium and found that it had all been spent. It was just like white chalk. It was no longer active uranium. So I don't know what's going on there. If they just didn't want us to get a hold of the uranium, because often, this is one of the messages contactees will get, is the dangers of nuclear proliferation and the use of nuclear material, really, in any capacity. But it's a really interesting case of UFOs over mines. I wrote a chapter about this in one of my books. I probably should have done a whole book on it, because man, oh man, the number of cases. Nickel mines, I mean, you name it, every type of mine. It's a great place to dig into reports of UFOs.
And let's take a look at all your books here. You are a very busy man with all of these books. They just nonstop.
Yeah, well, I love doing it. I think it's an important subject. We all deserve to know the truth about what's going on here. This cover-up is unfair. They're using our tax dollars to label UFO witnesses as idiots, explaining away all UFO cases as hoaxes, hallucinations, misperceptions, and mental illness, all the while knowing themselves this is a 100% real thing. So it's not only disingenuous, it's cruel, and it's the wrong choice, no matter how you slice it.
Here's an interesting topic: undersea UAP bases. What could you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was interesting because Admiral Tim Gallaudet, who has testified before Congress, actually gave a shout out for this book. He said he read it and that it contained a number of interesting reports, which was really cool because I spent 10 years, no, not kidding, gathering reports of UFOs and USOs in this area. And I've got a bunch of data points which point to something unusual going on in this area, because these cases go way, way back, well before 1920s. I mean, there was a book called, Mysteries of California or something along those lines, where the Native Americans reported seeing these objects come down. They call them skyboats because they go underwater, they'd be on the surface, and off they go straight up. Earliest reports I found were about the 1920s, but really ramped up in the 1940s. And some of these reports involve not just 2 or 10 objects, but 20, 30, 40, or in a few cases over 100. So it started to become clear to me that the waters there are very active. This area off the Santa Catalina Island, the Santa Catalina San Pedro Channel, mile for mile, produces more USO reports than pretty much anywhere else in the world. It's at least in the top 3. So I've collected, it started about 150 reports. It's now closer to 200. So there's something going on there. I couldn't prove that there's any type of base. Initially, I thought that there might be, but now talking to contactees who've been told, Dolly Safran I point to, because she asked the ETs about this, and I'm like, no, we don't have a base down there. I think there might be a government undersea base in this area because I do believe we have the technology to do that. And there are some eyewitnesses who say they've been taken to what wasn't a UFO, but what appeared to be an underground area. So I don't know. I'm a bit on the fence about it. There's the Malibu anomaly, pretty well-known structure off the coast of Malibu. It's very famous. It got a lot of publicity about, 15 years ago. And if you look at it, it definitely looks unusual because it's got a very flat surface, multiple columns or pillars on the front, and what looks like a tunnel. Some of the Google images don't show this, some do. You can't really pick and choose. So I'm a bit on the fence about it, but ultimately I feel like that is an artificial structure, probably a megalith of some kind that's been there for a very long time, because I did get some interesting report from a Native American, Chumash Native American elder, actually, who said that basically they've known about this. They've been in this area for some 2,000 years that we know of, more. And they said the levels of our ocean used to be much lower, and they would actually fish off the edge of this, quote, Malibu anomaly, and that they didn't build it. But the inference was that it was an artificial structure. And if you look at it, yeah, it looks artificial. It's got weathered, edges and stuff. It's not completely complete anymore. But really arguing towards its being an artificial structure is the fact that just recently, in the past couple of years, or less actually, Google Maps scrubbed it and blurred it out. You used to be able to go and look at it. Can't do that anymore. I'm glad I got images of it.
And you also did a book on the inside of UAPs. Is there any, there's all types of different ones that we've seen from the outside, but what are the common things that we might see from people who have claimed to see the inside of UAPs or UFOs?
Yeah, the reports on this are very consistent. In most cases, people will describe certain details that are reported over and over again. 80, 90% of what people tell me, I can pretty much expect to hear it, which would be primarily rounded walls. By that I mean they're straight, but curve into the ceiling and curve into the floor. All one seam, no seams, just one piece. No rivets, nothing like this. Very smooth walls. Not necessarily, metal hard, but sometimes they will describe them as being almost spongy a little bit, like dolphin skin. Others will report very, very smooth walls, almost always very clean and spotless, very little in the way of levers or buttons or furniture of any kind, very, very sparse, and stuff, when you need it, comes actually out of the walls. This is how advanced these things are. They're living beings, as we might think of it, embodied. these craft. This is how advanced they are. Indirect lighting. Very rarely has ever anyone seen what we would call a lamp or a light. The light just seems ambient everywhere. Most people will describe either being laid out on a table or just as often more like a dentist chair. That's very consistent. Another thing that's pretty consistent is people will describe a craft that's, say, 20 feet, 30 feet from the outside. Going inside, it's much larger, multiple rooms. So this just goes to speak to how advanced the ETs are, their ability to sort of manipulate space-time in ways that we don't fully understand. There's all kinds of little details that I kind of look for to test the authenticity of a person's testimony. These days it's getting more difficult because a lot of this stuff is out in the public arena, but there's a few I keep close to my chest. Because when people describe it, I'm like, well, here we go again. This is a very rare detail which a lot of people don't know about.
And for the species that seem to have reports of having like reproductive mating stuff going on with humans, is there any species in particular where that seems to happen more than ever? Because we always hear the Nordics are very similar to humans. I haven't heard much myself of a gray having a sexual encounter with a human, but how does it usually work?
Oh, definitely. There are reports of people being intimate with grays or having hybrid babies or being impregnated and having a fetus perhaps removed or go missing. This is a kind of a trick question because there's so many different types of humanoids. And I think we have a tendency to call them different species, which might not actually be accurate. In fact, I don't think it is, because the further I do research on this, what we're looking at is that we all are basically of human or humanoid origin. The ETs will say this over and over again, whether it's praying mantis type or Nordics or little blue beings or tall whites or grays of all sizes, that we share a common heritage, that we share ancestry, that we share genetics, and that what we're looking at is just different ancestries, but that they are all basically human, which argues towards why these guys are able to, mate with us or interbreed. Some of my earliest investigations involved, so-called hybrid babies. There's little doubt that that does take place, and some of this is more clinical. Others do report actual physical relations with grays, absolutely, or human-looking ETs, a wide variety. I think what we're dealing with is basically the humanoid form is the universal template, and our relationship to these guys is far closer than we realize. And I think when you look at the reports of human-looking ETs, I mean, that really argues strong for this. It has profound implications that really, I think, bring into question the possibility that we did not even originate on this planet, which is certainly what a number of contactees have been told, that we lived on Mars previously, actually, and were brought here. So yeah, it's a trick question. I think ultimately our relationship to these ETs is more akin to family. I think that's how they look upon us. Distant relations, perhaps, but not a completely alien species that has nothing to do with us.
There's been some new pictures coming out of Mars lately where there could be some potential artifacts spotted in various pictures. Have you noticed these or seen reports about it?
Well, not fairly recently, I haven't, but I've certainly looked into the so-called lunar anomalies, which I find far more convincing and do have firsthand reports of from some whistleblowers of stuff on the moon that we would think of as, perhaps abandoned ET bases and this sort of thing. But I'm on the fence with Mars. I don't know that the Martian face or the Martian pyramids are anything more than pareidolia. It's not my area of expertise, so I'm really kind of hesitant to speak too much on that. But I'm skeptical. From what I've understood about Mars, It's a dead planet. It's got no magnetic core. It's got no magnetic field, I should say. You simply cannot live on that planet for any length of time. So I'm very skeptical of reports of, the 20 and back phenomena that people are describing, or people living on Mars in any way. I don't think that that's scientifically possible. But no, I don't know much about the Martian anomalies, not really enough to comment on.
There's a fan on here that wants to know if you've heard of any type of alien. We won't use the word species that don't have 2 arms, 2 legs, or humanoid type agriculture.
There are a few scattered reports that I would call statistically insignificant. And by that, I mean, we've got probably close to I'm not sure it's quite a million of humanoid reports, but it's easily the tens of thousands. And occasionally you will hear reports that are not the standard humanoid structure, but it's so few and far between that I don't find them reliable. So no, pretty much all of them. I mean, there's a couple involving like blobby-like creatures, which could be a covering perhaps, or various space suit type paraphernalia, which could actually hide the humanoid form inside of it, and people might not recognize that as being, an outward structure rather than the actual being itself. So I don't know. At this point, I find that the humanoid form is absolutely the universal template, which is interesting to me because we're not getting, all kinds of tentacle-like creatures with multiple arms and this sort of thing. We do see little beings, quite small, to a foot or even less in some cases, all the way up to 15 feet. So there's a lot of variation in the humanoid form. But yeah, pretty much universally humanoid. I can say in my own files, absolutely humanoid. I've never gotten a report that wasn't humanoid in form.
Also, for the forums, that same person is asking about the Naztec mummies. Your thoughts on that?
I don't. The more I look into this, I'm skeptical. Honestly, I've examined these reports closely. I've shown them to medical experts, and they're profoundly skeptical of these. And some have been shown to be fakes. So, I mean, we'll see. If this is true, I think the truth will come out about it. But right now, at this point, I'm skeptical. I have not seen any good science that's proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that these are legit biological humanoids. From what I've seen, it's been stitched together from various things. I don't want to say too much about it because I'm not an expert, really, but from what I'm following it. And at this point, no, my assessment is I'm skeptical. I don't know that they're real. I may be wrong. We'll see. But that's where I'm standing at this point.
You were talking about hybrids earlier and all the research you've done into them. Could you confirm anything about Whitley Strieber's been saying that he's found that it's common for hybrids to be chain smokers, which seems interesting to hear.
No, I haven't heard that. I have not noticed any pattern like that. I did a real deep dive into people who are having contact and, what are the commonalities? And it's across the board. People have tried to pin it towards blood type, A negative and so forth. I found people of all ancestries who are having contact. Many of these people who have repeated contact do believe they're hybrids. And I think there's some good evidence pointing towards this. I know of at least a couple of contactees, Dolly Saffron, who showed me her genetics, which are very unusual. But no, I have not found chain smoking to be a pattern. In my own files, and I think this is borne out by other researchers, it's evenly divided between men and women. There's no bearing on ancestry or age or religion or political affiliation or all the markers that we use to sort of differentiate each other. Uh, so, as far as I can tell, ETs are not discriminatory really in any way, except for a couple of things. They do seem to follow certain family lines. That is absolutely a pattern, which I think is very well confirmed. Another really interesting pattern I found is that, almost without exception, people who have regular contact are profoundly psychic or report a large variety of paranormal experiences. So if someone's being taken on board, you can bet that they've had experiences with telepathy and clairvoyance and mediumship and astral projection and remote viewing and healing and perhaps physical levitation even. I know Whitley Strieber actually had that experience as well. There was reports that some crave lots of salt. I did not find that to be true either. I've asked that question. So, I mean, there are patterns, but I think we have to be really careful to put forth correlations on this, because there's all kinds of reasons someone might be a chain smoker. There's a lot of chain smokers out there who I'm sure are not contactees, but I don't know. I had not heard that. It's interesting.
Now, what do you think the hybrids could be all about? Is it to make a species to work on wherever they might be, on another planet or wherever, or in another secret area of the earth, or is it to secretly populate Earth? Or do the hybrids even know that they're hybrids? Are they just making these things and seeing how their life goes about happening? What do you think it is?
Well, it's all about genetics. I think that from one perspective, you could consider all humans hybrids. I mean, ETs have said as much. But I don't think that they're going to take over Earth or are building a special kind of being to live on another planet, or even themselves to come down here or anything like that. I think, honestly, this is my assessment. They are very interested in genetics. They do take genetic material from people, are supplementing their own genetics, which have suffered damage from perhaps gamma radiation or other causes. That's fairly commonly reported from contactees who've been able to communicate with the ETs directly. I think they're very interested in just upholding our own genetics and upgrading theirs as well. So I wouldn't call it an experimentation or anything like that, but sort of the activity that we do when we're breeding our animals to build to encourage, I should say, the most healthy specimens we can.
That makes sense. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. This is your website. I'll put it at the bottom of the screen now for anyone that wants to check out your amazing books. What's new with you? What's your next book that you're working on?
Well, I'm very excited because one of my favorite books that I've ever written is Symmetry, a True UFO Adventure, about Dolly Safran, who I've brought up a couple of times. I'm working on a sequel for that, which is exciting because we're going to dive into not only some of the experiences that we didn't cover in the first book, but really into the ET perspective on science and other dimensions, parapsychology, psychic abilities, the ET knowledge that she has learned directly from the ETs. So that's my next major project. Have a couple of books in the pipeline, one about out-of-body experiences, others on UFOs and parapsychology stuff, because it's all connected. I think it's important that we embrace the high strangeness aspects, or what we would call high strangeness aspects, which aren't really paranormal at all. That's a misnomer. We just don't fully understand it. Nothing's supernatural or breaking the laws of the universe. We just don't fully understand the mechanisms behind it. But yeah, my next book will be a sequel to Symmetry. That'll be coming out at some point this year. I'm aiming for May, but now it's looking more like it's going to be the summer sometime. Definitely this year for sure.
And where can we follow you on social media? I know you're on Facebook and Twitter.
Yep, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Do have a YouTube channel where I put out a lot of my investigations. I have a podcast I actually do each Monday evening with Dolly Saffron called The Light Gate on United Public Radio Network. That airs each Monday evening from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm on all the social media platforms. I'm pretty easy to find. You can find my books on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and other online platforms and bookstores. Always love hearing from people, whether they've got a comment or a question or a story to share. I appreciate you having me on the show, Devin, because this is an important subject. It really is. We all deserve to know the truth about it.
And you are definitely one of the most researched people on the subject out there with all the books you've written, and you're very you're not all about salesmanship either. You're very much about getting the information out there. So that's what I like about you. But you do put out great books and great information. So I appreciate you coming on. I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to tell the fans.
Thanks, Devin. Yeah, well, if I could leave anyone with a message, it would be don't look to our governments for answers. Don't think they're going to be truthful. Look to the contactees. Do your own research. Be very careful to sift through the misinformation and disinformation. Don't buy into the fear narrative. The ET agenda is very clear if you take an objective look. The onboard experience, it's one of healing, honestly, guiding, teaching, informing, warning, waking people up to not only the ET presence, but to our own psychic abilities. They really are encouraging that. So that's what I would encourage people to do. Meditate, move away from fear, allow love and truth to guide your actions, and we'll all be much